Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just getting over a cough, so I really hope I don't have a Theresa May moment. But if I do cough and clear my throat a bit more than is normal, then I apologize for that. Have some water here. I'm really conscious that I spend quite a lot of my time talking about the what and the why. And today, with a little bit of context up front, which some of you may have heard, actually, if you've been to previous Together We're Better events. But I really want to get into the real operational, how do we get round some of these problems of creating transformations within organizations through the lens of the customer, the user. To make sure that you're future fit, because a lot of people talk about disruption, and we are being disrupted all the time, and we will increasingly be disrupted. So these are, and I think both Jason and Audrey put it really well, this is happening. So you do need to think about how future fit you are and will become. Wrong way. So this is a cliche, and it's been seen before, but this image speaks to something that's been distressing me increasingly, especially over the last 18 months, couple of years. And it doesn't matter whether you're a practitioner that works for an organization or whether you're a practitioner that works within an organization, whether you're a researcher, a designer, anyone that tries to endorse user-centered design. This still happens. Because organizations don't think about the processes that they need to go through that will take the outputs. And I'm calling them outputs because I don't want to call them deliverables, because really there's a lot of chat around let's get out of the business of deliverables, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. We really should be getting out of the business of deliverables and waterfall projects. But really, sometimes outputs are quite useful. It's important to have outputs. The right outputs used in the right way really do set a bedrock for a much more fundamentally user-centered culture within an organization. And what can happen is, I'm going to get this clicker right in a minute, and what can happen is they end up in a scenario like this. Can anyone name this film that this is taken from? Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I'm going to labor this metaphor a bit more later, but the Lost Ark, these outputs are like the Lost Ark. They're full of incredible insight and treasures about our audience, but sometimes they end up, you sort of give them over and they're well received and they're like, woo, shiny things, they're great. But what happens is eventually they tend to sort of get lost in the maze of other great stuff that has been produced over the years. And people have produced a lot of stuff over the years. But what are they doing with that stuff? You know, it's like it's a shame that these things can become lost in the process of them being or not being embedded within large organizations. So I'm just gonna get a show of hands. Who in the room has conducted user research in the last year? Okay, so that's quite a healthy show of hands. That's probably a good 70% of people. And who routinely plans digital products and content that is based on user need? Okay, it's pretty encouraging. But it was less than the previous show of hands, which is good, because otherwise it renders that point useless. And the point I'm making there is, I think there's been a real maturity to people like me and my team's delight. There's been a real maturity of people focusing on the experience of their users. And that speaks to getting insight, getting data. It speaks to the way that we creatively communicate that experience, so more the UI, not the UX. And the technology that we use, all these things, they're really important, and people are getting on board with this. But they tend to be focused on the result, the end product, and getting to that end product very quickly. But what it doesn't speak to, and I think that not enough focus is given to the capabilities that will deliver that service or improve that service and ultimately improve that user experience. So that speaks to the levels or the varying levels of literacy that exist within large organizations. The digital team The digital team shouldn't really exist, should they? What is the, Jason said, what is the digital team? I don't even know what the digital team is. It needs to be more pervasive. And the processes and the abilities of those people need to be more consistent across that. Again, hand it over, what do I do with it? And that then shines a light on, I'm going to get this right in a minute, that then shines a light on the culture of the organization. And leadership, is leadership fit for purpose? Is it sort of ready to be disrupted? And within the not-for-profit sector, I think that there's a real duty of care for people to actually take this seriously, because if you commission some work, it doesn't matter who does it, internally, externally. If you decide to not use that work, in a lot of industries, that's kind of fine, that's up to you. But increasingly, charities are becoming more and more publicly accountable for the way that they spend their money. And actually, kind of there is a duty to make sure that you do use that insight well, and it does translate to an impact to your service users, to the end user. And so therefore, is there a strategy in place which people actually understand? Is it executable on an operational level, or is it something that's produced at a higher level in a more command and control sort of context, and then not really rolled out or understood in a practical, applicable sense? And do leadership foster a culture of innovation, whereby, people talk a lot about, they talk a lot about sort of startup mentality and innovation labs, but are they fostering the behavior that actually will allow that to happen? Allowing staff to be more agile and more autonomous in the way that they work, and more self-managing within teams that need to be multidisciplinary. So that's just setting a bit of context, and I think therefore it's less about just user-centered design, and digital transformation is a misnomer, because I think a lot of the time digital transformation really, when you unearth what people are talking about, it really is about a technology project, or something that will affect the result, not the process and not the people. So if you put those together, you get a clicker that doesn't. No, you get if you can only really create genuine cultural transformation if you put all of those three things together and affect user-centered transformation. And this is something that we've coined over the last year or so, because it just makes sense to consider this as a whole, not just to consider the end product or service. Okay, so now I'm going to take you through 5 different processes that we've been developing quite recently, which we feel are sort of hoping to go some way to create meaningful transformation. The first one is a roles and goals exercise. Now, this is usually used to kick off a project, but actually its value, it goes beyond any particular project. And here's one in action. And basically what it tries to do is to frame and create much more detail around a hypothesis that you're then looking to prove or disprove through the course of some sort of research or some sort of design, research-led design. So yes, it puts a focus on a greater focus internally on empathy. So I probably should have said in context, this is an internal process. This is a process that we do with internal stakeholders. This is not a user-led workshop. And there's good reason for that. Because you're getting as wide a group of stakeholders together from across the organization to really start to see how the project is going to unfold through the lens of that user. It's very easy at the beginning to say, okay, well, let's establish who your audiences are, and you can be a bit sort of high level about that. We've got a fundraiser, and we've got a donor, and we've got a volunteer, and we've got a service user. Hang on a minute, a service user? Well, who's that? It's like, that's a very broad title. And in many contexts, that can mean many different things. So you're really getting a lot more granularity about the specific roles that individuals have with you and what their goals are, to try and come up with a set of assumptions that you think you need to disprove. But more importantly, this process actually plays towards the curse of the expert. They're in the room, and actually a lot of people in organizations do know a lot about their users, and I think it's easy to dismiss that. With everything being so focused on user-centered design, sometimes we miss a trick by not collaborating with people that actually do know a fair amount about their audience, because there's a huge wealth of knowledge within these organizations that people have been exposed to over the years, anecdotally or in the field. So it's therefore very good for gap analysis. And you can really start to focus on, well, do we just need to repeat the same process again and go out and speak to all these users and spend lots of money, profiling people that you kind of, some of which you know more about than others? Let's focus that research. And quite in a timely way, what's quite interesting about this process is basically looking at data management. When we ran this, we actually ran this, the example I'm showing here is, we ran this exercise with breast cancer care. And they invited, one of the attendees was their data scientist who looks after their CRM. And he was able, throughout the process, especially towards the end of the process, he was able to say, actually, we've got a pretty good idea of that, but we don't have any idea of that. And we could almost score these roles and these goals and how much evidence or assumption there was about each one. And so suddenly you're starting to get a group of people together that are looking at a single customer view. And what do we need a single customer view for? GDPR, which is looming next year on the horizon. So actually doing this exercise and maintaining this insight beyond the project is a really useful exercise to get your house and your data management policies in order. The next one is an exercise to try and encourage greater empathy with customers. So this was a workshop that we've subsequently ran, but this was a workshop we ran for the British Heart Foundation, and it was part of a cross-departmental away day. There were over 100 people in this room. Anna, you can validate that. But the agenda here was to try and get people working not only cross-department. I think there were digital teams, there were customer service teams, but they were operating across the country. They were in different locations. And you had anything from very warm, people that understood customer-centered design, right the way from people that were working in contact centers that were quite junior. There's a big gradient of people that attended this day. And we deliberately didn't make it about heart health. We created a fictitious scenario so that we could level the playing field and get people to collaborate on how they thought they needed to think around what a typical customer journey might look like. So we created this fictitious holiday company because everyone could relate to the booking of a holiday. So it kind of, it's that leveling the playing field. And we created basic persona and experience map templates. But the point here wasn't necessarily the output, it was the process of getting to that output so that people could understand that there was an entire journey and that those journeys were many variances within that, so that you didn't have that sort of single sort of persona that you get told that you need to refer everything by. And then the second session was then going through and taking that persona and plotting out a customer experience, but doing it collaboratively. So there's just a bit of video here that just shows how within the room people really valued the process of working together to really trying to understand and they really got into it. I mean, people really enjoyed this process. By the end of the day, people were actually seriously thinking about coming up with ideas for startups for holiday companies, because they just thought, well, I've thought it wasn't evidence-based, but that wasn't really the point. The point was to get people's mindsets thinking customer first rather than organization first. The third tactic has a good story behind it. This is something that we've been thinking about a lot anyway, around this problem of the sort of wall and the throwing things over the wall. And we're actually in a pitch for St John Ambulance, which we won, which is great. But in the pitch, the most senior stakeholder said when we were talking about doing research and creating useful research outputs that could lead to design impact and change. And this chap said, okay, well, so how are you going to stop this just gathering dust somewhere? And I thought, great, good question, because that's what I'm worried about. So it was almost a challenge for us to ensure that that didn't happen. I could have said, well, hey, look, you just got to use it. You guys have just got to run with it. It's up to you. That would have been really arrogant and unhelpful. So we thought, as part of this project, let's try and come up with a pilot, a pathfinder of our own, to try and just take, even if we just take one step further towards this idea of it not being sort of lost or forgotten. So here, I'm going to do a bit of a demo, a bit dangerous doing a live demo. And this is, as a caveat, this is very much a proof of concept. So this isn't something that's embedded within the organization, but it's something that I'm keen to show you just for a minute. So we'll go into this. So first of all, you can see that, and this is something that I could talk about at length, but I'll quickly mention it. This is deliberately externally, security, password protected, externally hosted, because a lot of the time the reason sharing is complicated is because IT policies prevent collaborative documents, and they prevent the easy dissemination of content. So this is the plan anyway. We're currently hosting this on an external platform. And on the left-hand side are all of the stuff that you might have seen before. The strategy documents. You've got your personas. Yeah, it's great. It's all there. And then you can, if you want to sort of relate that to the experience maps, you can click on this and you can see the experience maps. I'm not going to go through these in any detail, because whether you know what these are or whether you use them or not, they're valuable in the right context, when they're used in the right way. But the point is this is a single home that's organic and editable, and hopefully can be embedded into business as usual activities. But on the other side, you've got things that actually help to bring that to life in your channels. So, for example, a lot of talk is there's an awful lot of focus on user-centered content. So, for example, if I create these outputs, no matter how useful they may or may not be, how is that going to help to transform the way that I actually write content for users now that I know a bit more about them? And often that doesn't happen. So you might have all of these tools might be somewhere else completely, or they might not even exist. So these exist in the same place so that you can, for example, use, it's very dry, it's a spreadsheet, but it's a persona scoring matrix so that I can validate. If someone's commissioned some content and they say put it up on the website, I can say, well, okay, is it working? Is this correct? Has it followed the guidelines that are also in the same place? So you get the idea. It's just trying to create in a very sort of nicely presented, sort of user-centered way a single living area where people can actually try to use these things on a daily basis. I'm conscious that I'm probably running out of time, so we'll go on to the next one. So, in a similar fashion to the sort of customer empathy workshop that I described a minute ago, this was the point. This project we did for Alpha International. It was an international research project, and Alpha would readily admit that they're a very successful company in what they've produced and what they do, and they're very design-led. But they probably aren't as user-led as they would have liked to have been. So we did relatively conventional project, big research, created outputs, very useful. But the point was, again, how did we get that to begin to become embedded within the organization? And what was so inspiring to see was that, upon our advice, they went away and immediately they sort of got round the abstraction of it being virtual and made it physical, which is a big first step in the right direction. And you can see Dave is holding up a whopping great persona. And the experience maps were huge. I mean, you could barely pick them up. And that's fantastic because it's really sort of getting them out into the physical environment, putting them up around the office. And so armed with these tools, so we had the personas and experience maps, and we'd also, alongside the lead user experience consultant, we had a data scientist looking at analytics across different territories. So we had these behavioral profiles, which were also, so we had loads of ammunition. And usually you could send that to people and they may be a bit swamped with it, even though it was really valuable. But they had all of these things. We had a prioritized sense of what users want from the research. And so we set about effectively a truncated design sprint to try and see where we could get to within a day, within a single day. And here you can see all of this stuff, all of this ammunition is being put to use in, and again, the multidisciplinary, cross-departmental teams. We actively got people that, so it wasn't just, well, here's the digital team, we really get it and we've nailed it, and then you have a team over here that just didn't really understand it at all. Deliberately mixed it up. People got really stuck into it. They're thinking through. They're identifying the problem and they're thinking through the design process, referring to sort of humanized data that's in front of them and they're easily accessible. And by the end of the day, the outputs were almost to the point where we could have user tested them. With a bit of refinement, we could have stitched these together in Marvel App and stuck them in front of a user. Maybe they needed a bit more work, but this could have been, literally sprint 0.1 of a set of design sprints. And it was just a really engaging day, and people really enjoyed it. They enjoyed the process of coming up with solutions that they knew were actually based on evidence and wasn't going to turn into a bun fight or this sort of, well, I kind of know better than you. Finally, and relating to the last one, lot is spoken about pathfinders, and we know from our own mistakes that massive organizational change just doesn't happen. It's just completely unrealistic. So we often try and affect change through identifying a particular problem and working on a pathfinder, and combine that with sort of Google Venture Sprint methodology with coming up with, we're trialing a new approach, which is effectively an adaptation of design sprints that are more geared towards startups. But the difference with large, and that's fine, that's a good principle, but the trouble with larger organizations is that you need a bit more time to try and gather a bit more evidence and to try and take more people along this journey. So very quickly, I'll just run through that process. So often you set out the destination on day one or session one, and then you invite users straight away to try and validate whether some of those hypotheses are right, even just within a couple of hours. And then you move into an ideate session, so you get as many ideas down as possible. You refine that into a final idea. Day 3, you prototype it, and as crudely as possible, and you just get that out to users. Literally, it could be you set your stage in a place where there's cafes and people, public, so that you can literally get out and get some validation in as guerrilla style as possible, which is this one. And then there's an extra stage at the end where you're focusing a bit more on the analysis and the shared consensus around how it might be that it completely invalidated. That's fine. You've spent a week, ditch it. Or you might realize that you've got some value in there, reprioritize it, plan the next sprint, and keep going until you get something that's actually worthy of something which is more invested upon to the points previous. So to sum up then, the more you try and practice these activities, the more you will improve your own service delivery model, and by virtue of that, the experience of your customers, and set the foundations for user-centered transformation. And there's loads, a shameless plug, loads more of detail around what I'm talking about in our white paper, which Lauren is going to email out to everyone after the event. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. We may have some questions from the floor for Al. We may not. Who? Any show of hands? Nope.
Absolutely confused everyone.
No. Oh, hello. Yes, thank you. Hello.
Well, hopefully these are replicable. Like, I'm literally talking about a day. And the thing is that the irony there in what you just described is that if how do we do BAU? But if you don't do this, then you're doing your BAU, potentially you're doing it wrong. So it's worth the investment of getting the team together for a day and then working out how you can refine that, maybe doing it therefore once a month, and then feeding that back into it's almost like the service design of your own internal collaboration process, so that you agile and innovate within internally rather than just for what you produce, because that then you can't see it in isolation. If you try it, like the example I gave, the workshop we ran for Alpha, that then sets the tone for people to go, oh, okay, I get this. I've created something. I've produced something. It's less show and tell, it's show and do. So if you show and do on a regular basis, then the doing becomes more BAU, if that makes sense.
Cool. Yes.
I had a question about your similar thing, but your truncated design sprint.
Yeah.
We've never done this before. I mean, it seems to me it could go great, could sort of whet the appetite to do more of this. I guess it could also present all sorts of challenges of how you start to bring this into the culture of an organisation and do justice to the different component parts of a design sprint. How do you find that works?
Yeah, I think one part of it is allowing leadership to actually let that happen. And the second part is to not see it as a fait accompli. Like, you're not going to do 1 week design sprints and then, like, nail entire problem. But it's getting people into the process of iterating and failing quickly. Yes, you can go and commission a big research project and have outputs at the end. Actually, that's really valid, because that sets the foundation for then that kind of way of working. And if you try a design sprint for a week and people don't turn up, or they've got way more important things to do, then you've tried. You've given it a go. But if you actually get to something which validates something really interesting, and you try it again, and you try it again, and you do another sprint, and it's very contained risk, you see, because you just do it for a week, and then you do another week, and you do another week, or maybe just 2 days, or you do 2 weeks. It doesn't really matter. The length of time is almost in contextual to what you're trying to solve. The point is that you're incrementally, you're changing behavior incrementally, and you're allowing people to work in a much more agile and sort of self-managed way. And that's the challenge to leadership. It's like, why are you doing that? That seems pointless. Do what I say. It's like, well, disrupt. You know. How much can you achieve in a day? Well, sorry, this much. You can get to the point where this was the show and do. So people who didn't understand what we were trying to achieve, there's a bit of context. There's people understanding the methodology and the mindset change behind user-centered design and what we're doing, and understanding the maps and the personas. And then 2 hours, and then after a break, getting into co-creation sessions, co-solutioning sessions, where teams of people are working together. This was all happening within 1 day. And actually, it was really positive to see how much people were designing proper test, almost, like I said, almost testable solutions within a day.
Very good. Al, thank you. That's great. And Al's going to be on the panel later on, so big hand for Al. Thank you.